in South Central Asia will come to order, and the purpose of the hearing is to examine the historical, political, and strategic context of the U.S.-India relationship. So appreciate the patience of our witnesses. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Hurry up and wait. We certainly just saw that coming off of the House floor. So I am going to recognize myself here for 5 minutes for an opening statement. The U.S.-India relationship is no longer just important. It is a defining relationship of the 21st century. If America wants a free Indo-Pacific, resilient supply chains, and a world where democracy, not authoritarianism, sets the rules, then our partnership with India is critical. While the partnership has been nuanced since India gained independence in 1947, and India's non-alignment posture shaped its strategic identity, the United States and the Republic of India share a common vision of a free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific rooted in democratic values and a deep desire for freedom. That's why every American administration, Republican and Democrat, has strengthened ties, or certainly at least attempted to, making clear that the United States does not see India as a temporary or transactional partner. Still, we must view this moment with clear eyes. President Putin's warm visit to India last week and India's participation in China's Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit this September raised some understandable concerns. At the same time, India has agreed to purchase more American energy, thereby reducing significantly its reliance on Russia. In fact, on my way in earlier, I ran into a delegation of parliamentarians from Latvia who, through connections with Michigan and the Michigan National Guard and the Latvian military, we're all very acquainted with them. And when I mentioned that I was going to be chairing this hearing on India and U.S. relations, the first thing that they brought up was, please ask them to stop buying Russian oil so that they don't have the cash to be a threat to us. So message received, message delivered. Moreover, authoritarian powers like China and Russia are redrawing borders by force, undermining democratic norms and coercing their neighbors. Nowhere is this more evident than in the Indo-Pacific, where an increasingly aggressive China threatens regional stability, global prosperity, and the open flow of commerce. China's string of pearls ideology is no longer just a theory, but rather an overt attempt to encircle and control the Indian Ocean, its sea lanes, and expand the militarization of these strategic ports and trade routes. We cannot allow this to happen, in my opinion. India knows these risks firsthand. Since 2020, Chinese forces have killed Indian soldiers on their shared border. India has responded decisively, pushing back against Chinese military pressure and limiting China's influence inside India and in neighboring Bhutan. Today, U.S.-India cooperation spans defense, technology, counterterrorism, and trade. Defense ties have never been stronger. India participates in the Quad along with our allies Japan and Australia. Additionally, our militaries conduct joint exercises from the Indian Ocean to Rajasthan and transfer some of our most advanced defense technologies to deepen military-to-military trust and interoperability. The counterterrorism cooperation is equally significant. The LET and the TRF, the organizations responsible for the heinous attack in Palagram, were designated by the Trump administration as foreign terrorist organizations in July of 2025, reflecting our shared commitment to fighting terror wherever it occurs. This partnership is not only about security. People-to-people ties between our nations are extraordinary. More than 5 million Indian Americans contribute to the American economy. They serve in our military. They lead major companies. Meanwhile, American students, businesses, and tourists engage with India every year, strengthening our connection to one of the world's most vibrant democracies. In fact, I'm submitting a letter for the record from the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, headquartered in Detroit, Michigan, supporting the work of this hearing and stressing that the U.S.-India relationship is not just a diplomatic one, but rather a living bridge of shared values, democratic principles, and economic opportunity, without any objection. India is one of the fastest-growing major economies in the world. American companies increasingly see India not just as a market, but as a partner to innovation, especially in AI, communications, and advanced technologies, where collaboration already exists. American companies are eager to enter the Indian market on a level playing field, A new trade deal with India under President Trump and Prime Minister Modi would further realize this goal and enhance the relationship. Open markets, strengthening supply chains, and driving innovation, all of which would chart a new beginning in our storied partnership. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and on how the world's largest economy and the soon-to-be third largest economy can work together to counterbalance China and preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific. And with that, I will recognize now the ranking member from California, Representative Kamlager-Dove, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I want to commend the chair for holding this hearing on the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership and leaning into the very important work of our subcommittee in stewarding this critical relationship. And why is this important? Because the U.S. relationship with India will be defining for both countries in how we are sort of placing ourselves in the 21st century world order. It is essential to sustain U.S. leadership in all the sectors that will shape the future: defense, climate, energy, AI, space, and emerging technologies. Working with India through the Quad helps maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific and enhances the regional influence of the United States and our partners. The strategic convergence between U.S. and India at a time of heightened international competition is enduring, but it certainly cannot be taken for granted. Successive presidential administrations of both political parties have devoted years of painstaking work to build trust and deepen cooperation between our two countries. When Trump took office at the beginning of this year, the Biden administration handed him a bilateral relationship at the height of its strength: a revitalized Quad, a budding defense tech partnership, and a trusted supply chain partner. These were hard-earned accomplishments and the product of strategic discipline from our two countries. And then what happened? Flush, flush, flush down the toilet, the capital that Americans have built over decades in service of Trump's personal grievances and at the expense of our national interests. And unless he changes course, Trump will be the American president that lost India, or more accurately, that chased India away, while revitalizing the Russian Empire, while breaking up the transatlantic alliance, and menacing Latin America. That is not a legacy any president should be excited about having. When the history books are written about where Trump's antagonism towards India began, they will point to something that has nothing to do with our long-term strategic interests: his personal obsession with a Nobel Peace Prize. While that is laughable, the harm that it will cause is not. Singling out India for 50% tariffs, one of the highest rates imposed on any country, has effectively derailed leader-level meetings between our two countries. Yet the 25% tariff rate that has attributed to India's imports of Russian oil look pretty pointless when Steve Witkoff is striking backroom deals with Putin advisors to sell out Ukraine in exchange for some business investment. There have been real strategic costs to this protracted trade negotiation. The annual Quad Leaders Summit, one of the most important unity-projecting platforms for the U.S. and our Indo-Pacific partners, has been indefinitely postponed. This has sent a dangerous signal to our allies and the PRC about the U.S. withdrawal from our most pressing interests on the world stage. And beyond tariffs, Trump has also attacked the people-to-people ties between the U.S. and India. The $100,000 fee on H-1B visas, 70% of which are held by Indians, is a rebuke of the incredible contributions Indians have made to science, technology, medicine, and arts in the United States. Trump's policies towards India can only be described as cutting our nose to spite our face, and this is doing real and lasting damage to the strategic trust and mutual understanding between our two countries. Because let me be clear, being a coercive partner has a cost, and this poster is worth 1,000 words. You do not get a Nobel Peace Prize by driving U.S. strategic partners into the arms of our adversaries. We must move with incredible urgency to mitigate the damage that this administration has done to the U.S.-India partnership and return to the cooperation that is essential to U.S. prosperity, security, and global leadership. Congress understands the stake of this relationship on a bipartisan basis, and I thank the chair for providing the opportunity to get that on the record today. I look forward to a robust discussion, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair reminds other members of the committee that an opening statements that they may have may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. First, we have Mr. Jeff Smith, the Director of Asian Studies, the Director of Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. We have Mr. Dhruva Jaishankar, the Executive Director at Observer Research Foundation America. Thank you, sir. And Samir Lalwani. Samir Lalwani is the Advisor of Special Competitive Studies Project and Senior Fellow at the Indo-Pacific Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States and the Research Affiliate at MIT Security Studies Program. I would hate to see your business card, sir. So at this point, I am going to give myself 5 minutes for my, we're going to be, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We are going to have each of our witnesses give us their opening statements. Certainly I understand the issues that are important here before us, and we're very appreciative of your time, especially as we had fairly significant delay while we were waiting for things to get resolved on the House floor. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow us some time for member questions. So with that, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Smith. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the ranking member for having me today. I have been a vocal advocate for the India-U.S. relationship for nearly 20 years. So it has been a bit difficult for me to see the two sides hit choppy waters this year. Let me start out by saying I think the strategic partnership has been an unmitigated success for the United States. And in fact, I think it has been a rare success in a sea of foreign policy mistakes since the turn of the century. This is one of the few bipartisan successes that I think we'll be able to point to in the history books. My written testimony explains India's growing importance geopolitically and to the United States in greater detail. I will just briefly relay some of the greatest hits. We are, of course, talking about the world's largest democracy. We are talking about now the most populous country in the world. We are talking about a country that has nuclear weapons, aircraft carriers, a space program, and nuclear submarines. So it is in many ways at the top of the geopolitical pecking order. It is the fastest growing large power. It is a top 5 economy and a top 5 military today, and very soon it will be a top 3 economy and top 3 military. In other words, very soon China, India, and the US will be in a class of their own. And where India is positioned between China and the US matters a great deal. This has been a low-cost, high-benefit partnership for the United States, and the dividend from that investment has brought us material benefits. Now, over $30 billion in U.S. arms sales to India, over $200 billion in annual trade, over $40 billion in Indian investments in the U.S., supporting over 420,000 jobs. India is now buying $15 billion worth of American energy, and that number is likely to go up to $25 billion in the near future. We are doing joint patrols in the South China Sea. We are training for mountain warfare in the Himalayas. We are tracking Chinese submarines together in the Indian Ocean. We are refueling each other's warships at sea, resupplying each other's militaries, and India has granted us access to strategically located military bases, which is of utility to the United States. I want to talk briefly about what happened this year. Expectations started very high for the second Trump administration, in part because the first Trump administration went very well. In fact, it was arguably the best 4-year stretch in the contemporary relationship, including the reviving of the Quad Group, a boost in arms sales, a more formal relationship between India and CENTCOM, and a suspension of aid to Pakistan, among other things. So we entered Trump 2, I think, with high expectations and a visit by Prime Minister Modi in February that went relatively well, but we unfortunately had a few hang-ups First, we were unable to reach a trade deal, which resulted in 25% Liberation Day tariffs on India. Second, the Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on India for purchases of Russian oil, a form of sanction in order to persuade India to stop buying Russian oil. But between those two events, something frankly even worse happened that was not a major event in the US press, but it certainly was in India. Gunmen from a well-known Pakistani terrorist group snuck into Kashmir and went to a honeymoon mountain retreat and started shooting young couples dead in broad daylight. That prompted a response from India, including strikes on terrorist training camps, and an eventual exchange between the Indian and Pakistani militaries to include missiles, artillery, and drones. Pakistan made frantic calls to Washington, and the Trump administration ultimately intervened and helped to create a ceasefire between the two countries, which was an unmitigated good thing. However, I believe our administration's messaging on that conflict and the ceasefire put Prime Minister Modi in a difficult position at home. All of a sudden, he was not claiming victory against India's arch nemesis, but his critics portrayed him as bending to the will of the US and being subservient. And I think that made it difficult for Prime Minister Modi to message appropriately on this. And I think both sides could have done a better job handling that ceasefire announcement. I have a lot more to say on the China-India relationship, on the India-Russia relationship, but I would just say it would be strategic malpractice of the highest order to discard the quarter-century dividend of trust and partnership we have built with India, and I'm confident we can get the relationship back on a positive footing moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I now recognize Mr. Jaishankar for an opening statement. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Kamlagadov, and members of the subcommittee, I'm grateful for the invitation to appear before you today. I appear in my personal capacity as an Indian citizen, and my testimony reflects only my own views as an analyst of international relations. The US-India partnership has strengthened considerably since 1998. From severe US sanctions following India's nuclear tests, we've come a long way. Congress was instrumental in enabling the lifting of those sanctions under Bill Clinton and in passing legislation in 2006 to enable civilian nuclear commerce with India under George W. Bush. Congress has also supported the major defense partnership under President Obama and the resurrection of the Quad under Presidents Trump and Biden. In India, 3 successive prime ministers over the past 27 years have invested in a closer partnership with the United States. Today, that strategic partnership is very significant. The two countries have signed a series of agreements on military logistics, supply, and information sharing. All 3 military services have done military exercises this year. US sales of defense equipment to India have also grown, and India now operates 10 major US defense platforms. So why have 5 US presidents and 3 Indian prime ministers invested in this relationship over 27 years? The first major impetus for better relations has been economic opportunities for both countries. The figure of $212 billion in goods and services trade arguably understates the importance of the economic relationship for both countries. Taken together, Indian investors, importers, entrepreneurs, students, AI researchers, doctors, and tourists contribute conservatively over $200 billion to the US economy and are responsible for at least 830,000 American jobs in every one of the 50 states and territories. The second rationale for closer ties has been strategic, related to China's rise in assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific. In recent years, China has expanded and modernized its nuclear arsenal, undertaken one of the largest naval buildups in its history, and unveiled new unmanned and cyber systems. In 2020, a major mobilization by the PLA resulted in clashes in which 20 Indian military personnel lost their lives. China has also developed a network of potentially dual-use ports across the Indo-Pacific and beyond that might be used to secure critical choke points. The Indian Navy, as a result, has stepped up, increased the tempo of its patrols, and contributed to maritime burden sharing in the Indian Ocean and Pacific. Both the United States and India also have enormous trade deficits with China, $296 billion in the case of the United States, $99 billion in the case of India. And China's rare earth export restrictions have reinforced concerns about supply chain concentration as leverage with competitors. Another area of strategic convergence between the United States and India has involved stabilizing the Middle East. The Abraham Accords, brokered by the first Trump administration, enabled an economic dialogue involving India, Israel, the UAE, and the United States, And more ambitiously, India and the US have plans for an India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor. However, this considerable progress in consolidating the relationship is now at a political standstill. The biggest obstacle concerns tariffs. President Trump's desire to balance trade with India and access India's market is precisely what India is offering. India has signed 5 trade agreements in recent years and is actively negotiating at least 5 more. A solution to trade and tariff differences between the United States and India is therefore at hand. The second challenge in India relates to the United States' renewed engagement with Pakistan's military leadership. Pakistan has a long and well-documented history of using non-state terrorist proxies against India. As a result over many years, India's experience is that third-party mediation has often contributed to Pakistan's adventurism. And so the United States has pursued a policy of dehyphenation between India and Pakistan, engaging with both, but minimizing involvement in their disputes. There remains considerable progress for future collaboration should differences over trade and Pakistan be successfully managed between the United States and India. The outline of what is possible was spelled out by President Trump and Prime Minister Modi in February. This includes $500 billion in trade by 2030, which will be facilitated by a bilateral trade agreement. The United States is now a major provider of oil and gas to India, and coal exports have also increased, and civil nuclear cooperation is possible, as is cooperation on defense, on AI, and a variety of other emerging technologies. There's also the possibility of cooperation on the Quad and in the Middle East. The written testimony that I've submitted contains significantly more detail concerning the value of the US-India commercial partnership, India's challenges with China and Pakistan, the ongoing trade negotiations, the India-Russia relationship, and the considerable potential for US-India collaboration on trade, defense, technology, and energy. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jaishankar. Now recognize Mr. Lalwani for an opening statement. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Kamlagar-Dove, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the U.S.-India strategic partnership and its importance to a free and open Indo-Pacific. I'll focus on first principles, U.S. strategic objectives, recent progress, challenges, and some recommendations if I can get to them. For more than 25 years, there's been a strong bipartisan consensus that India is essential to U.S. strategy in the Indo-Pacific for 3 simple reasons. First, India is consequential to world order as a rising pole and a major economic, military, and innovation power. Second, the U.S. and India share core strategic interests, namely peace and prosperity for our societies, underpinned by a free and open Indo-Pacific. This involves a stable balance of power that deters aggression from any nation. Third, our partnership is grounded in common values and democratic institutions. We may differ at times on individual issues, but we remain aligned on the core principles that underpin a stable international order. So what are U.S. strategic objectives? First, economic opportunity. India is a fast-growing market with highly skilled workforce that offers opportunities for American businesses and consumers across energy, defense, technology, agriculture, and healthcare. Linking our supply chains reduces dependence on China, strengthens resilience, and supports new jobs and investment. Second, science and technology cooperation. India has proven its innovation prowess, from advanced lunar missions to world-class digital public infrastructure. India offers one of the most dynamic innovation hubs at scale, rapidly advancing in AI, quantum, biotech, space, and software. It produces enormous STEM talent and hosts nearly 1,500 global engineering centers. Partnering with India helps the United States sustain its own long-term technological leadership and win the strategic tech competition with China. Third, defense cooperation, which plays a critical role in balancing China's military power. Joint U.S.-India military exercises, intelligence cooperation, and logistics agreements, and defense co-development enhance deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. India can eventually shoulder more day-to-day security responsibilities in the Indian Ocean, complicate Chinese military planning in a cross-strait crisis, and provide industrial surge capacity in a protracted conflict. Over the past decade, in recent years, we witnessed significant progress in our relationship. First, new strategic frameworks, such as the Trust Initiative, transforming the relationship utilizing strategic technology, and a new 10-year framework for the Major Defense Partnership, which are driving defense and economic cooperation, as well as joint progress in space, defense, cyber, autonomy. Initiatives like INDUS-X in Asia have helped network startups, R&D, capital, and primes to build defense capabilities for both countries. Second, our militaries are training together at an unprecedented pace, scope, and sophistication. Complex exercises on land, air, and sea are complemented by a multitude of routine exercises deepening interoperability. India is also working more closely with U.S. allies and contributing to standing maritime security missions in the Indian Ocean. Third, defense industrial cooperation is accelerating. We're advancing more co-development and co-production of systems such as drones, sonobuoys, jet engine components, satellites, and semiconductors. Indian deep tech companies are also expanding into the United States, bringing jobs and innovation to our shores. Now, every relationship has its challenges, but some run deeper than others. On the India-China relationship, fears of a recent diplomatic thaw, I think, are overstated. Border disputes, strategic rivalry, and Beijing's coercive economic behavior will ensure that relationship stays adversarial. India's legacy dependence on Russia for defense equipment and energy is real, but also steadily shrinking. Russia, unlike the United States, plays little role in India's technologies of the future, like AI, quantum, and biotech. Recent trade frictions with the United States and tariff escalations have catalyzed some concerns in India and risk eroding some trust. While a major trade agreement can unlock significant gains, we still need to rebuild that confidence in U.S. reliability. But perhaps the biggest challenge we face right now is a say-do gap. Implementation has not always matched ambition. Slow progress on major initiatives, such as jet engine co-production agreement, can dilute strategic benefits and weaken deterrence. Closing this gap requires investment of sustained resources, focus, and leadership. So to strengthen the partnership, I offer several recommendations. First, increase funding for U.S.-India defense innovation, including INDUS-X, joint challenges, joint accelerators, and field testing integrated into joint exercises. Second, create a joint investment fund to support deep tech partnerships modeled on successful prior U.S. co-investment platforms. Third, increase funding and authorities within the Departments of State and perhaps Commerce to support the trust technology agenda, bilateral innovation centers, STEM exchanges and visitor programs, and IMET. Fourth, streamline export control processes and timelines for India using approaches similar to recent AUKUS legislation. With enhanced commitment and sustained focus and oversight, we can ensure this partnership reaches its full potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. The United States and India share a vital interest in ensuring that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open. The sea lanes of the Indian and Pacific Oceans carry the trade that literally fuels the global economy, including billions of dollars in U.S. exports and nearly 80% of the global seaborne oil trade. If adversarial powers gain control over these routes or expand their bases across the Indian Ocean, they could have a dangerous leverage over the global economy, given India's strategic location along key sea routes in the Indian Ocean. Increasing naval cooperation seems vital to counter China's maritime ambitions. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Smith, and kind of work down the line here. What concrete actions should Congress take to improve U.S.-India maritime cooperation specifically and intelligence gathering to bolster deterrence in the Indo-Pacific? I think you had mentioned doing joint monitoring and some other things that are going on, and just please elaborate on that.
Yeah, there's already a good deal of cooperation underway, particularly intelligence sharing around the subject of maritime domain awareness that has improved significantly in recent years. I frankly think there's always room for even more improvement. Chinese submarines had not been present in the Indian Ocean until the last decade. Around 2013 and 2014, they started doing routine patrols, couching them as anti-piracy missions, although most of us know you don't need a nuclear submarine to counter pirates off the Somali coast. That understandably has India very concerned. China also has, as you mentioned, these string of pearls bases around the Indian Ocean, including in its close strategic partner, Pakistan. That presence has India feeling increasingly encircled, right? So they have the border dispute issue, but there's also a maritime component to the rivalry, and that has been heating up considerably. You have the U.S. with a base in Diego Garcia, which has been under question as of late. I think it's important that the U.S. maintain access to Diego Garcia. But on the other side of the Indian Ocean, you have an Indian naval base at the mouth of the Strait of Malacca at the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And frankly, this is an extremely valuable asset for any country, certainly for India. I would like to see even more U.S. and Indian cooperation around that location because it allows the both of us to monitor the traffic coming in and out of the Indian Ocean from the Western Pacific.
Okay, Mr. Jaishankar.
Thank you. Jeff has actually covered many of the main issues. China established its first overseas military base in Djibouti to the west of India. And so, as he suggested, India is now confronting the idea of a sort of militarization of the broader area to its north, west, south, and east. The Indian Navy has, since 2017, increased the tempo of its patrols in the Indian Ocean. It conducts regular piracy operations, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief. It has also taken a bigger role in the Western Pacific as well. This year alone, the Indian Navy did exercises with Korea, South Korea, and Australia, visited Papua New Guinea and Fiji, and did exercises off of Guam as well. So there's a lot more that can be done, particularly in the underwater, in the undersea domain. That's been a particularly sensitive issue for the U.S. Navy, but that remains an area where there can be much more cooperation.
Okay, sorry, my time's going quickly. Mr. Lalwani, I'm going to have you answer my next question. Just this week, the United States and India hosted the 21st meeting of the Joint Working Group on Counterterrorism, where they discussed emerging threats, terror recruitment and financing, a number of those things. What specific counterterrorism initiatives between our two countries are proving most effective, and how can the United States strengthen our ties with India to achieve meaningful outcomes that degrade radical Islamic terrorism?
Well, thanks for the question. I think there's a number of things we're doing already that are effective. We have a lot of collaboration in law enforcement, intelligence sharing. I think that's sort of historic and been going back since the Mumbai attacks in 2008. We've been collaborating a lot on counterterror financing at the Financial Action Task Force. We have actually a standing mission at the Combined Maritime Force that's doing a lot of interdiction of illicit trafficking, shipping, arms, drugs, and financing, all that sort of finance terrorism. And I think the areas where we could start to build even more is on capability development. So as India acquires more intelligence capability, space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, AI tools and applications for better data fusion to more rapidly address threats, I think we'll start to see more effective deterrence and counterterrorism operations.
And everybody has been spectacularly on time. We haven't gone over a moment until just now. So with that, I will recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. You know, it is rare to have this relative bipartisan agreement on an issue, so I want to capitalize on it for a moment. I will ask each of you the same questions. It's no gotcha, I promise, but it really is a simple yes or no, and I'll start with you, Mr. Smith, and then we'll go to Mr. Jaishankar, and then we'll go to Mr. Lalwani. So, Mr. Smith, would you say that our partnership with India is critical to countering China's malign influence, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jaishankar?
Yes.
Okay. Yay. And so, would you say that India's role in the Quad enhances our ability to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific? Mr. Smith, I'll start.
Absolutely, yes.
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 Okay, perfect. Last question. Would you each say that a strong U.S.-India partnership makes it easier to maintain deterrence in the Indo-Pacific? Mr. Smith?
Yes.
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 Okay, it is fantastic and wonderful to hear that we are all on the same page, and I would have said yes to each of those questions as well. So now I want to walk us through the 50% tariffs that are currently holding the U.S.-India relationship hostage. And Mr. Jaishankar, I will ask you these next few questions. Did the U.S. and India begin negotiations on a trade deal before or after Trump announced in April that he was going to subject India to the 25% Liberation Day tariffs?
Thank you, Congresswoman. This would actually be a question that I think the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative would be best equipped to answer. But based on what has been publicly reported, yes, the negotiations began before February 13th. It was on February 13th that President Trump announced tariffs.
Right before Valentine's Day. Yes. I got that information as well. And that would lead me to believe that the tariffs were not even really needed to kickstart negotiations since they were already happening. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Jaishankar, is it your understanding that since February, U.S. and Indian negotiators were working in good faith and were very close to reaching a deal when Trump went ahead and imposed the 25% tariff? So not asking like what the deal was, but is it your understanding that they were close to getting to a deal?
I do not know how close they were at that point of time. The tariffs kicked in on April 2nd, but negotiations had started. My understanding is by early July, the two sides had reached quite close to an agreement.
So that's my understanding as well, that by July there was actually a deal on the table, that both sides had negotiated, but it was a deal that for some reason Trump didn't like. And so he essentially imposed these tariffs and put everybody back at the negotiating table. So now we have the 25% Liberation Day tariffs, and then to everyone's surprise, Trump imposed an additional 25% tariffs for India's imports of Russian oil, bringing the number to 50%.
Yes.
So my question for you, Mr. Jaishankar, is did the administration make clear that India would be subject to a cumulative 50% tariff for Russian oil imports before or after they actually imposed the 50% rate?
So I believe on August 6th, there was an announcement by President Trump that using executive authority that he would have the ability to impose it. It would kick in September. So that was when I think the official announcement took place. The extra 25% tariff was imposed in September.
After, exactly. Yeah. So I'm sharing this because for me, the theme of this administration seems to be to punish your partners and abuse your friends. And I don't know about you, but this is not how I would do a partner. My job, I do want to say that my job is not to be a sole cheerleader for India, but it is to ensure that the U.S. has the best strategic alliances around the world. And I consider India to be one of those strategic alliances that we should be continuing to cultivate. And I would argue that Americans will be less safe if India has a stronger relationship with Russia and China than with the United States, because the tariff rate on India is currently higher than the tariff rate on China. Meanwhile, Russia and China are getting pretty good deals from the administration right now. A favorable resolution for Russia and Ukraine, and an effective policy freeze on sanctions and export controls for China. I just think we should be, Mr. Chair, rethinking how we treat our partner, how we treat our partnership with India. And with that, I yield back.
The ranking member yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank you to our distinguished witnesses for being here today. Over the last several decades, America and India have developed strong defense, economic, and technological partnerships. As we meet today to discuss the Indo-Pacific region, I look forward to hearing how the U.S. can continue to strategically partner with India. Mr. Smith, in your written testimony, you note the important partnership between the U.S. and India in countering China's influence. You stated, of all China's neighbors, India has offered the stiffest resistance to China's more aggressive foreign policy under General Secretary Xi Jinping. What steps can the U.S. take to maintain and strengthen our strategic security partnerships with India to counter China?
Yes, sir, thank you for the question. And I just want to underscore again the point I made in my written testimony, which is that India indeed has shown the stiffest resistance. It has engaged in, it has stopped Chinese coercion at their border. Unlike us, it was able to ban TikTok essentially overnight when it saw an espionage and influence operation problem with TikTok. In fact, it banned dozens of Chinese apps when they became problematic. And it has put up fierce restrictions on Chinese investments in India that could pose security risks. So I just want to underscore again that India has been much tougher than many of its other neighbors that have been bullied and coerced by China in offering some resistance. I think there are a number of things that we can do to continue to strengthen the India-U.S. partnership. I think developing the Quad continuing to develop that and even potentially to expand the Quad to allow for observer nations to join in Quad military exercises would be a way to broaden that coalition. There are always more things that the United States and India can do together in a bilateral way. There are several weapons platforms that could be useful to India in deterring Chinese aggression at the border and in the Indian Ocean that the United States should be prepared and willing to sell to India. And there are a number of intelligence sharing arrangements that I think we could put in place that would help India to monitor Chinese movements along the disputed border, for example, or Chinese submarines in the Indian Ocean. But I think we also need to do a firmer job supporting India diplomatically when it faces coercion from China and showing it that it has a trusted partner and friend in the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Jaishankar, continuing on this subject, what strategic role does the Quad play in countering coercion in the Indo-Pacific?
Under the Biden administration, the Quad was resurrected under the first Trump administration, primarily as a coordination mechanism. Under the Biden administration, it became elevated to a leadership level meeting, and a number of working groups were established to work in a very large number of areas. I would say a signature achievement was the creation of an Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative. Under the Trump administration, there's been a paring down of the Quad on a few key areas, which is really maritime security, economic security, technological security, and humanitarian assistance. And these are all areas where the Quad could be doing a lot more. In fact, this year, in a small way, the Quad continued to do a lot of that work. However, a Quad leadership summit has been repeatedly postponed. India is expected to host the next one. I think breaking the impasse in U.S.-India relations would help in getting to that summit and achieving more through the Quad.
Thank you. Mr. Lalwani, you highlighted in your testimony the important role of economic partnerships between the United States and India. How can continuing to deepen America's economic ties with India counter China's economic coercion?
I think there are a number of ways. One of them would be onshoring investment, in enhancing Indian capabilities, production, manufacturing, so that it becomes less dependent on Chinese trade. I think there's previous witnesses have mentioned the stark imbalance in trade and depends on, for both of us, with China. And so that's at least certainly one way where you can sort of wean off or help India wean itself away from dependencies on Chinese imports. Probably some other ways have more to do with also technology. So, for example, Apple's making iPhones in India, scaling up that manufacturing, moves the supply chains away from China, increases the supply chains in democratic countries, and is in both our mutual interests.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Barra of California for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opening questions by both the chairman and ranking member, and the strong bipartisan support that that Congress has shown for the U.S.-India strategy. We recently introduced a resolution, a sense of Congress that was bipartisan, 24 members, talking about 3 decades, of strategy, going back to President Clinton, to President Bush, to President Obama, to President Trump's first term, to President Biden. It's clear our interests from the congressional perspective and the administration perspective is a closer relationship, both our economic interests, our geopolitical strategic interests, to create an atmosphere of security, peace, prosperity that I think both the Indian people want, that we also want. Mr. Smith, I appreciated Chairman Huizenga's questioning about the importance of the Indian Ocean region. I recently visited with Western Naval Command and sat there. And the maritime partnership between the United States and India is extremely strong right now, and I think there's a desire to do more joint training, more exercises. That's a vast region, and we will have to partner with India. I'd love to get Australia more engaged in the Indian Ocean area as well, because we were probably a little slow into the Pacific Island region and so forth, and lost some ground. But we see what competitor nations are doing in that region, and for a free and open Indian Ocean region, for maritime security, for freedom of navigation, it's going to be important for us to work together and much more closely together. I guess I will ask a question. I know the ranking member had a picture of Prime Minister Modi with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, and that does cause some heartburn for folks in Congress. But I also think my assessment is India understands their long-term interests. They have to coexist with China. They have to, trade with China, look for ways to be competitors with China. But my assessment, having been in India recently, is they also understand a lot of their long-term interests lie with, the West, a lot with the United States, with Europe, others. They're welcoming U.S. multinational companies investing, and there's some synergy there. I guess I'd start with you, Mr. Lalwani. You say that is inaccurate?
Absolutely.
Mr. Jaishankar?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Great. I also, some of the recent announcements, the $100,000 tariff on the H-1Bs, was announced when we were landing in India, so spent a lot of time trying to do some damage control there. My perspective is this fee hurts American companies, disadvantages our companies. I'm glad that I've heard the president at times say, hey, wait a minute, we need this talent. We need these relationships. We need to work with like-valued allies or I wouldn't say like-valued partners to solve these big challenges, whether that's AI, whether that's biohealth security, whether that's creating redundant supply chains. So I'm glad to see the president starting to put out those comments, and I hope we can work together in Congress to come up with a visa that allows Indian scientists to travel back and forth to the United States, as well as U.S. Scientists and engineers to move back and forth to India. And that's something that we've had conversations about, to create a visa category or corridors where we can freely move back and forth. These are not folks that are threats to overstay their visas. In fact, the dynamism of young Indian talent that's come here to get educated, many of them are not going back to India because you see dynamic markets in India where there's tremendous growth in the domestic economy there, that they can do proof of concept with their ideas, they can scale up in India and then bring those ideas back to the United States. So I would hope we see more of this cross-collaboration. I guess the last question I would have is, or it's probably a statement. Yes, we do have some concerns about India's closeness with Russia, but just based on historic norms, that's to be expected. What I would like to encourage India to do is, the president sincerely does want to find a cessation to the conflict in Ukraine. India can play a unique role given their lines of communication with the Russians, given their ability to understand the Russians, to bring them to the table. I would think the president would look at that very favorably. I think this is a time for India that wants to take a bigger role on the global stage to, step up to the stage and use your father's a very seasoned diplomat who I've gotten to know. So I think he's very capable of doing this. And then when this conflict ends, we are going to have to work together to figure out, how do we bring Russia back into the fold? What does that look like? So I think India can play a big role there. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, the gentleman from India, Shreve, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate this opportunity to offer a statement and to ask a question of our witnesses. As some of my colleagues have noted this afternoon, America's dependence on China for our essential supply chains is an ever clearer vulnerability. Beijing increasingly dominates in pharmaceuticals, as it has for some time in critical minerals and other core inputs. It's not an academic concern. It's a national security liability. In a crisis or conflict, we can count on China disrupting the flow of basic ingredients and materials that keep our economy and our military humming. Even with America's world-class innovation in manufacturing, our system leans too heavily on China for the chemical building blocks of our pharmaceutical supply relies upon. And that's certainly a big deal back in my state. Take ibuprofen, and I didn't know this until more recently, but Chinese manufacturers, by some accounts, 95% of the ibuprofen sold on our shores China is the dominant global producer of many of the generic active chemical ingredients, especially antibiotics. Estimates place its share of those API supply chains at around 80%. If Beijing ever turned off the tap, we could count on major shortages in our supply chain within weeks even, if not surely months, depending on the drug. Critical minerals paint a similarly sobering storyline. China controls some 70% of global rare earth mining and about 90% of the refining. Many of us in this committee, and certainly our witnesses, are keenly aware of that. These minerals are the backbone of everything modern: semiconductors, cars, electronics, medical devices, also big in my state, batteries, advanced defense systems. China's already shown its willingness to weaponize these exports. A full cutoff could halt key production lines in the auto sector or leave hospitals scrambling for critical equipment or choke off components essential to our most sophisticated defense systems, such as the F-35. Dependence on China for these strategic minerals is unsustainable. Congress has a responsibility, working with our allies, to secure, strengthen, and diversify these supply chains that we find ourselves in this preventable crisis. A question first for Mr. Smith, please. You noted the growing U.S.-India cooperation in your written testimony. I'm sorry I didn't hear that in person, in the pharmaceutical supply chain security, especially around these generic, these APIs, and that's encouraging. Are there additional tools Congress can provide to help accelerate and strengthen this effort, sir?
Thank you for the question. A few things of higher priority. It should be a higher priority for us. I thought we learned our lesson with COVID supply chains. We didn't. I thought maybe the critical mineral supply chains would have woken folks up here. In terms of APIs, first we need a clear mapping of APIs and where they're coming from. We need to be able to separate the China-dominated inputs from those we're realistically getting from elsewhere. I think targeted incentives and faster regulatory pathways to those high-priority APIs, as well as an expansion of the strategic national stockpile that focuses more on non-finished drug APIs and precursors, would be of significant utility. I think we also could work with countries like India on joint workforce training and standards alignment that would make the cooperation easier. But the reality is we're going to have to work with other countries, and India is at the top of the list if we want to get these supply chains off of China. And we have to. We are not an independent and sovereign country if we are reliant on our communist adversary for our key materials.
Mr. Smith, I appreciate that straightforward response. A question for Mr. Jaishankar. Given Latin America's strategic importance and the wealth of critical minerals, can you detail how our partnership with India can help foster interaction with the Mineral Security Forum members, including south of our border, Ecuador, Venezuela, Peru, and Mexico?
Mm-hmm. India has been widening its presence in Latin America. It's opened up new diplomatic missions there. There's new forms of engagement with that region, including in security and trade. One thing that has been explored has been U.S.-India joint investments through the Mineral Security Partnership in critical minerals in several areas, but there's a lot more that could be done in that area.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. With that, the gentlelady from Washington State, Ms. Jayapal, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very proud of my roots in India, my birth country, where my mother still lives after my father's passing earlier this year. And as the first and only Indian American woman in the United States Congress, I'm deeply invested in this strong U.S.-India bilateral relationship. Our relationship has been forged in shared democratic values, countering the influence of China, and strategic partnerships on everything from innovative technologies to pharmaceutical manufacturing. And I think a relationship that strengthens both of our countries while calling out areas of disagreement, if necessary, is very important. We've both our countries face enormous challenges today, including democratic backsliding, including discrimination, decreasing freedoms of press and religion, and increasing human rights abuses. We also are facing challenges around tariffs, both here in the United States and in India. These tariffs are damaging India's economy and also hurting American businesses and consumers. Just last week, I heard from a fifth-generation family-owned company in Washington state that relies on agricultural products from India that can't be sourced at scale in the United States. They told me that these tariffs are the greatest threat to their business in over 120 years, and they're looking at either downsizing or offshoring their production to meet increased costs. Meanwhile, this president has threatened people-to-people ties by shutting down legal pathways to immigrate, reminiscent of a legacy of discriminatory quotas that made it extremely difficult for Indians to immigrate in the first place. As the only member of Congress to have been on both a student visa and an H-1B visa, I deeply understand the harms of those policies and am committed to making sure that we continue to provide strong legal pathways for people to come to this country from India as well as around the world. I've also been concerned about, and just met with this morning, a coalition of groups that's been working on anti-Indian hate that has been rising in the United States, and I've been hearing about from my own constituents. I just want to make the point that Indian Americans are extremely important to our economy, an integral part of our society, running major Fortune 500 companies as well as startups and leading cutting-edge research to save lives. So I want to start with tariffs, and I'll come to you, Mr. Lalwani. In August, President Trump doubled tariffs on many Indian goods to 50%. How concerned is India over the fact that its neighbors, Pakistan and Bangladesh, have secured lower tariff rates than India, while India continues to actively negotiate? And how could the perception that the U.S. is no longer a reliable partner impact India's relationship with BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
Well, I think it is certainly a tremendous concern within India, certainly because of the costs of goods, or the export potential is limited now. And in terms of the relationship with the SCO and the BRICS, I mean, I think it can push India closer to those countries. We saw some evidence of that, and the president took note of it, I think, in September.
Yeah, we could certainly have the opposite effect, I think, than perhaps what is being stated as the goal of those tariffs. Under the Trump administration, as I mentioned, we've also seen a wholesale attack on legal immigration and immigrants, in particular on student and H-1B visas. Mr. Lalwani, between the attacks on legal immigration and the anti-Indian rhetoric that's coming from individuals in the administration, what do you see as the effect on the U.S.-India relationship and the people-to ties that build our goodwill and connection?
I think I would worry a little bit about the deterrence of students, scientists, and Indian businesses, technologists that we have been counted on for our own technological prowess going forward if there's hostility towards them.
The last thing I want to talk about is just the increasing instances of transnational repression. And just last week, I sent a letter to Secretary Rubio expressing concerns about Pakistan's use of transnational repression to stifle dissent. I do need to call it out in the case of India as well. In November of 2023, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed an indictment alleging that an Indian national working with an Indian government official planned to assassinate Sikh American activist Gurpatwant Singh Panun in New York, was reportedly part of a broader plan involving multiple killings across the United States and Canada. And in addition, Indian intelligence has been linked to digital harassment and disinfo labs. This was an article that actually named me as one of the targets of that disinformation efforts. And so can you just briefly, I have 3 seconds, discuss how this repression hurts our bilateral relationship?
I think this is an area where I'm less informed and less of an expert in these subjects, unfortunately.
Do you have nothing to say on transnational repression?
I certainly worry about that as an American citizen as well. But I just think the cases that you're referring to are ones that the administration would probably have better expertise on that than myself.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. With that, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Baumgartner, is recognized for 5 minutes. I will note that we will be having votes coming up shortly, so we're going to keep this tight.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Frankly, I believe this is one of the most important committee hearings of this Congress. The future, if we're going to have a successful next 50 years in ever-evolving and very complex and dangerous international arena, the U.S.-Indian relationship is going to have to be a foundation of peace, stability, and opportunity for the world. We all know the commonalities between our two countries: democracy, multi-ethnic, and when our countries are at their best, the world is at its best. I had a wonderful opportunity to visit India this summer. I was very grateful, learned a lot, and shortly thereafter, I was one of the first members of the House to visit China for the first time since 2019, and learned a lot on both trips, appreciate both trips greatly. I feel to some extent that America through the previous decades has wanted to have a closer relationship with India than India has wanted to have with the United States. And I know there's a lot of flowery things said by both countries, but I would be interested to hear on your view of actually what kind of relationship India wants with the U.S. And in particular, I am one of those. I work on a subcommittee here trying to bring efficiency to U.S. arms sales, which both benefit our economy here and deepen our alliances. And so one of the show-me aspects of the U.S.-India relationship is increasing military cooperation in the forms of how much military equipment is shared between the two countries. And so if we could just start there, Mr. Jaishankar, I'll start with you. Could you give me a thumbnail sketch of what India wants out of the United States? Do we want the same thing? And what is your prediction on how much military equipment we will see India purchasing?
So on that, I think it's quite clear India wants a close strategic partnership with the United States. And I would underscore the word partnership there. India has not sought a kind of treaty alliance of the kind that the United States has, say, with NATO partners or with Japan or with Australia. We've had 3 prime ministers now since 1998 who have all in their own way invested in a deeper partnership with the United States, sometimes against political opposition in their own country. In 2008, the Manmohan Singh government actually put its future on the line. It had a vote in Parliament actually on the question of a closer partnership with the United States. Prime Minister Modi has hosted 3 successive U.S. presidents in India. So I think there is a great keenness on having that closer partnership, and it's materializing in a number of ways, and I can provide any number of metrics. The United States.
Can you speak to me to the arms sales?
Oh yeah, sure. So India currently uses 10 major U.S. defense platforms. I think we will see a reduction in direct purchases. We will continue to see some. There's been some authorization by the U.S. State Department recently on some more purchases by India. But I think India is also looking at indigenizing its own defense industry, and that actually opens up room for co-production and co-development of future systems as well.
Just in the interest of time, I just want to say that on my wonderful trip where I learned a lot, in one of the waiting rooms as I was leaving the airport, there was a wonderful book on the history of the Indian Army, and as I was very impressive history. But I got to a page of foreign partners, and there was a full page picture doing training with Russians, yes. And there was a small little box doing training with Americans. And the next time I go to India, I'd like to see those pages reversed. Finally, I'd just say that of all the things that America and India will need to deal with successfully, countering transnational terrorism will continue to be an extremely important part of the relationship. We saw the terrible attacks originate in Pakistan earlier in the year. Can you just speak quickly, Mr. Smith, on the future of the U.S.-India relationship regarding transnational terrorism?
Well, here's what I'll say on the future of counterterrorism cooperation. I think President Trump's instincts in his first term were correct. And I will quote from him directly: the United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. They have given safe haven to the terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help, no more. Unfortunately, one of the things that binds the U.S. and India together is our shared history of being under threat from Islamist terrorism, and unfortunately, a great deal of that terrorism has emanated from Pakistan. And I think we need to do more as the U.S. government, but also in collaboration with India, to eliminate that threat. and to convince the Pakistani military to stop using terrorist groups as assets of their foreign policy.
Thank you.
Gentlemen's time has expired with that. Votes have started, but we will push through and recognize the delegate from Guam, Mr. Moylan, for 5 minutes.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panels as well. India matters to our Indo-Pacific strategy, and it may become one of the most important maritime partners. Just a few weeks ago, Guam hosted Indian Navy sailors for the 29th integration of Exercise Malabar, with what began in 1992 as a bilateral exercise between the U.S. and India, years before the Quad even existed. Malabar has since grown into a sophisticated multi-interlateral Navy exercise with Australia and Japan as regular participants. Today, Malabar stands as a clear example of what Quad cooperation can achieve, because the Quad works best when it delivers practical outcomes and particularly at sea. But the Quad can still be improved upon. The critical first step is to expand the Quad Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative into the Western Indian Ocean, an area where nearly 80% of global seaborne oil trade flows and where Chinese Navy actively is increasing. We've seen this playbook before. China normalizes its presence, expands gray zone tactics, and gradually increases pressure. This is just as it's done against the Philippines in the South China Sea. India understands this reality, and its priorities are clear: safeguarding the Indian Ocean, monitoring PLA activity, and working closely with partners. That's exactly where the Quad can be most effective, reinforcing stability, building interoperability, and deterring coercion. I'm aware that the Quad is not a formal military alliance, but it is still critical strategic partnership of maritime nations committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific. It's time we invest in ensuring that Quad can meet our shared challenges. So, Mr. Smith, India's maritime strategy under Prime Minister Modi is increasingly focused on China's presence in the Indian Ocean. Will this strategy drive a shift in Quad maritime cooperation, or will India continue to limit the Quad's role to exercise and dialogue?
It's a very good question. I think there actually has been more of a shift toward a maritime focus for the Quad in some ways since we revived the Malabar quadrilateral naval exercises. Technically, they are not a part of the Quad itself, but they are the same four countries exercising together and sharing information. And so I think, if anything, the Indian government has been leaning more firmly into both security cooperation at a quadrilateral level and also at a bilateral level. There was a period not long ago where India was reluctant to specifically name China as its top threat or to publicly admit that it was concerned about Chinese submarines operating in the Indian Ocean. I think we've actually been moving in the right direction in that regard, and that our maritime cooperation is improving, although I personally would like to see the Quad assume an even more explicit security focus broadly and in the maritime arena specifically.
Thank you. And Mr. Lalwani, considering the way the India-China borders crisis escalated several years ago, how credible are Indians' abilities to deter China at sea without escalation?
Did you say to deter it at sea?
Yes.
I think they are increasing and growing, but would depend a lot on the United States partnership for enhanced deterrence capabilities, naval capabilities, anti-submarine warfare, things like that, which is also happening with the Quad, which I think is important to draw out too.
Okay, we got less than a minute left, but last question, Mr. Jaishankar, how has India's maritime approach shifted after Shangri-La dialogue? Did discussions at the Shangri-La alter India's assessment of China's maritime intentions in the Indian Ocean?
I think there's been a big shift since 2017, and particularly since 2020, in India's approach to maritime security. And I'll give just a couple of quick examples. One is combined U.S.-India or coordinated U.S.-India cooperation within the Combined Maritime Force in the Indian Ocean. So we've seen, again, we're doing now in some ways coordinated operations. And then India's now providing military equipment to countries, including the Philippines. These include anti-ship cruise missiles. So these are just some of the ways in which India is actually doing a lot more operationally as well in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you very much to our panel. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I want to thank our very distinguished panel for your valuable information today. I think this was great. I agree with Mr. Baumgartner. I think this might be one of the more important discussions that we are having up here, and is going to influence and affect the next 50 years geopolitically tremendously. So the members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you all, or some extensions of that, and we ask you to respond to those in writing. They will come to me through the chair and then on to you. And pursuant to committee rules, all members will have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. So again, thank you very much. We deeply appreciate your time and effort here again, as we had an extended period due to floor activity. So thank you for that, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.